We had visionary people in the 60s, 70s who preserved land in an emerald necklace so that each of 6 parts of DuPage County would have green space. It's an investment to make in the investments that we've already made in our homes and community. And the benefit of buying the land keeps our taxes lower because once that land is designated forest preserve, you're not building schools on it, which are 2/3 of our tax bill. You're not building roads. You're not having to have police and fire. And it just is much more money than open space. Open space keeps our county aesthetically beautiful. People love it.
Hello and welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linda Ulrich, and I'm also the founder of a wonderful good news website called The Goodness Exchange. For 11 years, we have been writing about innovators, idea people that we all should know a lot more about. And we are going to get started talking to one of them today. I have the most amazing person, I just got goosebumps, to introduce you to. She's one of those unsung heroes. And I don't know, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I'm saying she has changed the lives of millions and millions of people in the Chicago area. Our guest today, Kaaren Oldfield, is responsible for spearheading with hundreds of other people the efforts to raise over $2 billion and preserve 40,000 acres of green spaces in 4 counties in the suburbs of Chicago. And the taxpayers have given that money happily. This is the real brilliance of what Kaaren Oldfield has discovered. Most of what you see for parks and green spaces now at forest preserves come from this long history she's had where she pulled together knowledge from 4 areas of her life. She was always interested in green space, nature. She volunteered a lot, so she learned a lot about what has to happen in the natural environment in urban spaces. Then she had a stint where she was a newspaper editor, which gave her great communication skills. And she also had a brilliant marketing career. And then she was a distinguished real estate agent. So those 4 corners created a box of knowledge that makes Kaaren Oldfield very uniquely suited to spearhead preserving over 40,000 acres in 4 counties in the suburbs of Chicago. And her concept that we want to share today is applicable any place on the planet, we're pretty sure. And so we want to celebrate that concept, and we want to turn anyone on to Karen's work who would like to learn what she has learned and apply it in their own areas. Everything starts with just one person's good intention and then a knowledge base, which Kaaren Oldfield is happy to share. And here we are beginning that journey today. Thank you and welcome, Kaaren Oldfield.
Thank you, Linda. I am so happy to be here and be able to spread the good news about this revelation that I came upon after a number of years of doing what I've been doing. It didn't happen yesterday, by sure, but it's a recent thing that I have thought of. And I'm just grateful to be able to spread the good news about it and introduce it to people. And hopefully we can have the country know about it, and we can take care of some of our clean air, clean water problems in a big way.
Yeah, that was the part of the equation that I didn't appreciate until after we did our pre-call. Now, so what Kaaren is talking about, the knowledge she's got and making that knowledge available to people all around the country in urban areas. It's not just about creating more parks for us to roam around in. Green spaces, forested areas, it stops flooding, and flooding costs communities millions and if not hundreds of millions of dollars regularly. And we now know urban planning mishaps with flooding have happened because we have not left enough green space to absorb great deluges of water. And then there's the property values. I was shocked to hear how much more valuable people's hard-earned money goes in towns that have a lot of green spaces, because your house is worth 15% more, and your neighbor's house and so forth, if the realtor can say you've got a lot of green spaces in your community. And then there's the parks, and then there's clean air, and it goes on and on. I really want folks to help me celebrate this and think about where they live. And if you need more green spaces, Kaaren Oldfield has got a system that she is working with dozens and dozens of other people in her area to create a voter referendum positive track record. Because make no mistake, you haven't gone out and asked millionaires to donate money to preserve all this land. You are 14 for 14 on voter referendums?
14 for 14 have passed, and I'm currently working on two more in DuPage and Kane County that are on the November 5th ballot.
All right.
And
so
hopefully the record could be 16-0.
It's just an extraordinary model. We're going to get into the model in a minute, but something I wanted to just mention was that I had always been curious when I looked down over Chicago. I live in Vermont. I grew up in Illinois, Southern Illinois, and I have flown into Chicago countless times. And when I fly over Chicago, I am always shocked at how much green space there tends to be in a city with how many millions of people, if you include the suburbs, Kaaren?
Oh, I think it's over 6 million people.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
But when you look at it from the air, there's just forest after forest after forest. And that didn't happen by accident. It turns out since, I don't know, was it 1997? I read in some bio for you that this all sort of kicked off.
Well, my first one was in 1997, but Chicago for years has been a beautiful city. And one thing that they didn't overlook was their planning. And it's very easy to get around in Chicago. They started with a great forest preserve, and they preserved a lot of open space, a lot of land. And it's easy to get around in Chicago because of their grid system. And you always know where you are. Western Avenue is as far north as it is as far south into the suburbs on both ends. And so this was because of the people who developed Chicago. And that started back with Daniel Burnham and Montgomery Ward and Frederick Olmsted. Right after the Chicago fire, it was a great opportunity for them to rebuild the city. And Daniel Burnham in particular did Lakeshore Drive and set it up so that the buildings had to be on the other side of the drive, not on the beaches. So we have that beautiful lakeshore. And then we had the World's Fair, and they built beautiful buildings for that, our museums. And it went on to become just a wonderful place. They invited architects from around the world. The skyscraper was started at that time. And then we have the wonderful river cruise that you can take. And that's my favorite. And you can have a tour of the river and find out from the tour guide every building and when it was built. And it's just fabulous. So with that, Chicago was the head of it, and they had a referendum. They still are having referenda. The last one I think was several years ago, but it passed. And even though they get it for more forests and so upkeep and whatnot, they are still finding places that can use the money to take care of their forest preserves. So.
Yeah.
I admire Chicago. It's a beautiful city.
Well, okay. So there was a ethos. There was some infrastructure that started right there in the big city, and you have an amazing history that I'm going to go through really quick in just a minute. Your origin story that led you to continue that ethos and even build upon it out in the suburbs as they grew. But first, I want to give people an example of what we're talking about here, because I don't want people to snooze or start thinking that we're not talking about something that's relevant to them. Okay, no matter where you live, you probably remember an occasion where a piece of land opened up that would have been ideal for another gas station. Like we need another gas station quick stop. We do not. And this land opens up and it's going to go to the highest bidder. And then somehow, maybe if you were lucky, it got put to good use for the public. Well, tell us, I think this is one of the stories you told me that I think will get people in a mindset to continue listening to this episode so they think about the possibilities where they live. You talk about this great opportunity in a particular town. There was a corner that opened up and it was going to be used for a Buc-ee's.
Correct.
If I don't know, in the Northeast, we don't have Buc-ee's, but it is a very famous truck stop, sort of quick stop gas station operation.
Right.
And you were looking at the land that was right next to it. And you organized, and the folks you work with that do such a good job in this, organized the public around purchasing this land and putting it to good use for the greater good. So tell us that little story.
The Buc-ee's wanted to go on to the northeast corner of Butterfield and Route 53. There were two other gas stations at the time, and it was going into a place where there were 2 3/4 acres right next to a Butterfield Park District park with golf course and swimming pool. So it was just natural that 2 3/4 acres would be finished and remain the park. And it actually did. It became an art and culture center with beautiful limestone where people could sit out and enjoy events there. But that didn't happen accidentally. The park board came to the Conservation Foundation, which I've been a member of for years and years, and asked us if we would help them to preserve or buy and hold the lands in order to give them time to do an open space referendum. And that's one of the things that they do, we do, and make that happen. And then in the meantime, we did a referendum. 1.5 million went to buying that 2 3/4 acres.
Wow. And then, and now you have this incredible event space that is attached to the park that's just beautiful
Right.
and perfectly situated for the community to enjoy. It's this kind of strategic thinking that we need, and that's why I thought it was so important that I share this story. I'm just hoping that your work lands on the right ears, and Karen's going to give her contact information out at the end of this interview. She's easy to work with, and she is eager to transfer what she's learned all these years and this unique view of how it works to get the public to invest in themselves. That's really what it is, right, Kaaren? There's like a
Absolutely.
land. The way I always understood this was there was kind of a land trust buy and hold system, but what you're doing is different. This is way more complex than we have time to share on this particular episode. But I did want you to give like a little tiny short course of how this actually works with voters and why it's a win-win for everyone.
We had visionary people in the 70s, 60s, 70s who preserved land in an emerald necklace so that each of 6 parts of DuPage County would have green space. And every 20 years, there's a new plan that comes out, and with certain number of acres and what's going to happen in the community, in the county in those years. So it's kind of predestined. There are some acreages that we can buy, but we add to the forest preserve. And when we buy those, with the referendum money that the taxpayers vote yes for, that they want, then the land is paid off. We take a 20-year bond out, and the people pay off the bond in 20 years. And then the people in the county own that land. So it's an investment to make in the investments that we've already made in our homes and community. And the benefit of buying the land keeps our taxes lower because once that land is designated forest preserve, you're not building schools on it, which are 2/3 of our tax bill. You're not building roads. You're not having to have police and fire. And it just is more money, much more money than open space. And open space keeps our county aesthetically beautiful. People love it just looking at it. And of course, it creates places along rivers where the land or the water drains naturally into the riverbed, and the trees obviously give back oxygen, and it keeps the cycle of a natural uh, process going. And in the meantime, people have it around their yards, and we have trails that people can exercise in, ride bikes, walk, play with their grandchildren. I mean, it's a win-win situation all the way around.
What we're talking about here is such an expansive concept. I mean, what you've been a part of in your community and all the people who've been on these boards and these conservation nonprofits, what you all have done has changed the lives of teachers. Don't children grow up in an entirely different way if there's lots of green around them?
Absolutely, they do. Yeah, we have an education program where the teachers take the kids out to the woods and learn what weeds are, and they plant trees and they pull the dry mustard, and it's a whole two
Invasive
hours
species control, yes.
invasive species, and these are kids that sometimes live in our cities in our areas like in Aurora that are in apartments and they don't have that access to the
Mhm.
forest preserves,
Yeah.
and definitely it's very important.
Yeah, and then how about the Chamber of Commerce? Being
Well,
able to say you have so much green space.
that's huge for the Chamber of Commerce because they are meeting with executives, people that we have many corporate CEOs, and they're coming out here to see where they might want to raise their family,
Yeah.
and they're making moves from far away. And
Mhm.
so when they
Mhm.
come and see the number of golf courses and the number of open lands and just the
The park
opportunities
district
here,
access, all the things that are
Park District, swimming pools,
yes, yes, yes,
tennis
yes.
courts. They
Yeah.
just love the beautiful open space, and it's impressive just to drive into DuPage
Yeah.
County.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, then there's parents. I mean, to be able to raise your kid in a place that can boast the kind of green spaces that you guys have created, I just can't imagine how that changes and improves parenting.
it does, and the parents get relief from the children being to go outside. They're so active. I see my
Mhm.
grandchildren. My daughter takes them out every day for a little while, either in the backyard or down to a park. They walk. They just have to do something with that energy. And while they're doing that, they're finding different bugs and different flowers.
And the
we
park
might
district activities. I
the
mean,
act baseball, the baseball fields, and that starts
soccer, all of it.
really
Yes.
young. The
Really
little
young.
eagles, they're like in second grade.
Yeah.
Soccer,
Yeah.
the courses they have, they
Yeah.
playing so many games, and it really helps the schools too because they have all those kinds of activities at schools, but not always enough of them.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
they're trading
Yeah.
with the Y for
Yeah.
swimming, for swimming
Yeah.
pools and things like that. So, once again, everybody benefits from it, and
Yeah.
and
And
the
a part of that too, big picture employers. I mean, nobody wants the 45-minute commute anymore because each way
mhm,
you're taking an hour and a half out of your day away from your hobbies or away from your children or what or your community or whatever. And
right.
to be for employers, man, if you have an attractive community that brings in new people that value community, you're going to get people that stay longer. You're at their jobs. You're going to get people that wouldn't think of moving. It's what you're doing, Kaaren, is a very big picture improvement in every aspect of people's quality of life. So I'm really, really hoping that people will share this episode, not particularly because they found it relative to their lives, but maybe if they share it, they will have the right ears. It will land on the right ears, and we can spread this notion and this whole
It's
concept.
about service to people,
Mhm.
overall service, and that was the one thing that's driven me, making somebody feel better, making helping their lives to improve,
Yeah.
whether it be through encouragement, there's little ways. This is a bigger way that
Yeah.
things can change. And
Perfect.
I'm very happy to help
Perfect.
anybody who wants to join me with this.
We just have to say thank you to all the people who serve on these community boards, the forest preserve, the conservation efforts, because that's something you pointed out over and over to me, is that this is one of those beautiful efforts that comes from the blood, sweat, and tears, and the passions and the expertise of so many different kinds of people.
Absolutely. Many, many people working very hard, on projects you can't even imagine. There's somebody for it, and there's somebody who loves to do it. So, but the general combination of everything makes it just a wonderful creation for our communities and our people.
I want people to understand this good enough to get really interested in contacting you. But I do have to tell people about your bio, because the other reason why I wanted to feature you, Kaaren, is that your work was introduced to me by the guy who has one of the oldest and largest TEDx conferences in the country, Arthur Zards, in Naperville, Illinois. He and I chat regularly, and he called me up one day, and we were chatting, and he told me about your work, and he said, people ought to know what Kaaren's doing. And I think you're a good representation of an ordinary person, just like an everyday ordinary person, like I was and am, who just saw what they are uniquely built to contribute. Like, we didn't go off and say we were going to change the world. We just little by little used our life experiences in a way that became something that made the world a better place for others. And I want to give just a little bit of your bio and then have you comment on that, because what's unique about where you started, and that's what I always encourage innovators to do, or people that want to innovate, or they want to contribute to society, or they want a life of purpose. I always encourage people to look back at how they were and what inspired them when they were a kid. And the part of your origin story that I thought was interesting was that you told me you grew up, you were one of 9 children, the oldest of 9. And when you were little, when there were just 4 of you in the household, you guys lived in an apartment in Chicago that looked down on a zoo, or in other words, a great park environment. Do you think somewhere in your story, that's where it all starts? This heart for parkland and the outdoors and animal life and wildlife?
Oh, absolutely. I remember that. And I have such fond memories of that. It was Indian Boundary Park at Western and Lunt on the north side of Chicago. And we lived on the third story of a big apartment building in with a busy street. In fact, Western Avenue again that I was talking about. And I would take my little sister down there and we'd play for hours. The park had a zoo. It had these fantastic, beautiful peacocks that I just remember the colors and the span of the beautiful turquoise feathers and the monkeys and the swings. It was everything. There was a little wading pool. And I just thought, it was the nuts. I loved it. And then a lot of green grass to walk, our doll buggies back to the building with. And definitely that was an inspiration. And
Okay. So that's step number 1 of finding purpose and meaning in life. If you're listening to this podcast, because we just talked to person after person who is doing some inspiring thing to make the world a better place, large and small. You don't have to save the world or help raise $2 billion to save 40,000 acres. There are small things that can make a huge difference in our own communities. But what I want people to take away from, if they don't know where to start, look at your life. Look at when you were a child, what made you light up, and it probably still makes you light up today. And it can be part of your story and your journey about what's next to find meaning and purpose. Okay, that's first. And then there's this part in your origin story that I thought was interesting. Society wants to take us somewhere else. Like, if we follow the social rules, we might be led way far away from our original journey, where
right.
we could be. And one of the things you told me was you married a guy who wanted you to be just a housewife that cooked spaghetti like the next door neighbor, Mrs. Saporino.
Right. That was
So
his neighbor in New York, all Italian and German first generation neighborhood, and she cooked very good spaghetti. Yes.
But, but you were, it was obvious from your history, you were destined to be a working woman at a time when it was not that common. The newspaper
Right.
editor, the marketing background, the real estate broker. This is
Right.
okay.
I was
So,
trying to do it all, Linda.
yeah. And I'm sure you made a good spaghetti like Mrs. Saporino did. All right. So I think that's step number 2 in the innovator's journey is this ability to, okay, maybe you just said you found a way to do it all. You got the spaghetti going, but you also found a way to follow your intellect into the wider world and do good things with it. Okay, then you moved to Glen Ellen. And here's the third thing that's really important that I've stumbled upon by talking to so many innovators. You put your toe in the water with with lots and lots of volunteering.
Right.
That am I right about that? Like you got
Yes.
started following this impulse to love parks and conservation and outdoors,
Right.
even though you were living in a highly urban area or an
Right.
urbanizing area, because wasn't Glen Ellen like a development community?
No, Glen Ellen was a small town. Everything grew around the railroads in Chicago,
Okay.
and actually, it was an old town. It was a wonderful place to live. But the first thing I noticed that all the trees were cut down, the ground was flattened, and I guess it was an easier way to build. But it was pretty stark looking, and there was a forest preserve, but it was the next county over. So I just longed for trees and brooks and rivers. And Glen Ellen, it really had that feeling of a Western or an Eastern Vermont kind of a town. So that was all great, and I was happy. And I just started out with joining things, and I joined this conservation group. It had only been in business 3 or 4 years, and so I've been with them for years and years and years, and I would urge anybody to start doing something like that, and because it's such a huge issue and it's so good for our world, and we're going to need more and more help with it by
Mm-hmm.
individuals.
So volunteering for like once you sort of narrow down, look at your childhood, look what lit you up, look what still gives you a sense of wonder, you know, okay, if society or your family says they need you to do this, but don't forget yourself in the equation, go ahead and make the spaghetti, but also do things that you love that light you up. And then start by putting your toe in the water with volunteering. That is definitely the third step. Okay. And then, I think one of the things in your origin story that I really loved is that is this discovery. Somehow you caught on to a movement that was already beginning, like this green necklace.
Hmm.
That was kind of where things started, right? DuPage County
Right.
had created these green spots that formed kind of a necklace, but you found a way to integrate into the community where lots of business people, politicians, and influencers started looking at your volunteer efforts and your knowledge base, and they called you up one day to have lunch to begin this process. Tell us about how that eventually happened in 1997.
Well, in 1997, I had started after the newspaper. I had a baby and I had started a PR business, and I ended up working on a lot of local campaigns, and had other clients that I did public relations and marketing for. But I had just worked on a campaign, and the actual president of the organization and the executive director asked me to go out to lunch with them, and they presented a study from a land trust that showed interviewed 400 people in DuPage County, and they said, "Could you read this and tell us what you think we should do?" So I started reading it at the table and the answers, and I said, "Well, what I'm seeing here is what's polling is people are most concerned of their quality of life, and the other highest concern that matches is keeping their taxes low." And so I'm going to have to, or we're going to have to do both of those and explain to the people how we're going to do it. So they said, "You're hired." And they said, "Well, this campaign is going to be on the November 5th ballot. And we want you to be the campaign manager. And we have 8 weeks to get this done. So that was all new to me. And we started in the doctor's office. We had our office, and we had a kitchen cabinet of stakeholders in the community. People had name recognition and were known volunteers and had an interest in whatever happened in our county. And it worked very well. The kitchen cabinet was fun. We had
You
lots of
passed it by
arguments.
70%. You passed it by
Yes,
70%,
we
right?
passed it by 70%.
The
But
referendum. That is
yes, yeah.
crazy.
Well, we had help with some outside consultants and so on, but we did. It was a different kind of a campaign, and we did figure out how to tell people that their taxes would remain low and their quality of life would get higher, and the land would be theirs after the 20-year bond was paid off. And that became what we called the ultimate tax cap, because then you were done paying for it and it would go on to your grandchildren and great grandchildren and future generations. And so they ain't buying any more land, as
Yes. They aren't making
Will
it, right?
Rogers, they ain't making any more land, as Will Rogers would say. So that it continued to be something to do with numerous advantages.
Yeah. Okay. So you've mentioned the kitchen cabinet. Okay.
Yes.
Because that is step 5 of the innovator's recipe in my book, but we're going to take a break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk more to Kaaren Oldfield. If you want your community to look different, to feel different, to be healthy, to have less environmentally damaging, costly episodes, you need to talk to Kaaren Oldfield or get somebody in your community to contact Kaaren. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll learn about the kitchen cabinet of people. You know how the constant negative noise in our digital lives feels like it's reaching a boiling point? Now, many of us have tuned out the news and social media almost entirely. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are newsworthy stories about amazing progress, innovation, leaps in human potential, and wonders in the natural world, and they're just not reaching the top of our feeds. We can have access to this, but none of us has the time or maybe even the emotional stamina to search through all the doom and gloom news to find what's right with the world. Okay, enter the Goodness Exchange. There, we are giving instant access to positive news for curious people. Did you hear about the recent Harvard study that found that exposure to just 4 minutes of good news can make you 32% less anxious and 18% more optimistic? Well, I don't know about you, but I need those kind of numbers in my life. So if you want to live with more joy and way less fear, it's really simple. First, you join us at the Goodness Exchange. Everyone around the world has the opportunity to access this kind of content. And we've promised no politics for about a decade, so you're safe from all that distraction as well. Second, you allow this new, more positive, balanced worldview to put a spring in your step again. It can change the way you react to your kids, your coworkers, everybody you come in contact with. And the stories we write about can make you the idea person in your circles. These challenging times call for us to wake up and take control of our perspective. The people who use the Goodness Exchange have the ability to react to the harshness of the world much different because they know way more about what's right with the world. And that's a resource. So subscribe to the Goodness Exchange, our YouTube channel and the podcast, and use this content to live a more expansive worldview. It is still an amazing world out there, and you can be a part of it. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Goodness. Okay, we're back with Kaaren Oldfield. Kaaren is an amazing thought leader in this world of preserving green spaces in urban areas. We've already discussed sort of 4 steps, the innovator's recipe for finding meaning and purpose in something you're particularly good at or interested in or could be spearheading. And we are on what I consider the 5th, which is the cabinet, the kitchen cabinet. So Kaaren, explain to us this whole kitchen cabinet concept, because it's where the fun is. It's where the humanity is. It's where the connection is.
That's exactly right. We got together, it was a homey atmosphere, and we knocked ideas around. I told them that I considered the pole the Bible because it had everything in it that we knew that we needed. And we talked about different things that people were aware of and wanted in the we were putting out brochures. We had decided as an organization that we could put out brochures to vote yes, but the Forest Preserve District could put out brochures to tell them about the referendum, but they couldn't advocate for it. So we were the arm that could say vote yes. So that's where we came in. But anyway, what happened at meetings was we just talked and we argued sometime and one of the things I told them, it's, really about the birds and the bees, and everybody has to be on board. Everybody has to know what we're doing. And people are just really saying, what's in it for me? And it all comes down to one person. And so if you can tell that one person and teach that person, and a person can teach another person, pretty soon everybody's on board. So we ended up with a pretty good working plan of how we were going to handle things. We got very many volunteers. Everybody wanted to help. It was a real grassroots effort. And volunteers, we had a wonderful campaign, on the ground campaign, we call it. And I think that's how we won it, because we had so many people involved, letters to the editors, and then two brochures and to explain things, colorful brochures. So that was really the fun thing that I remember. And we've always had a kitchen cabinet with every referendum now.
Now, so a kitchen cabinet is a collected group of people who've come together from different. You invite people into the story,
Right.
into the project that have different angles from it. I'm
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Exactly. Somebody from government, some community leaders that, have been members of the Conservation Foundation for a long time, people who have different skills. We probably had no more than 8 people in the cabinet. So, I mean,
Maybe an attorney, maybe somebody with some financial
exactly.
background,
Yes,
maybe. Yeah.
absolutely. An accountant, people that we need to help us or can find out who else can help us. And but we kept it small because it's easier to work with. So they were kind of making the final decisions on, how many distribution of the brochures and that kind of thing.
Now, one thing I like that you mentioned just there too was that that it really does come down to person by person what's in it for me. I think that always voting for or volunteering for or whatever the greater but good or expecting people to is a stretch. I
Yeah,
think that most of us will not vote or support anything that goes against our personal best interest, right? But you
right,
guys had this amazing way, I'm sure, by bringing together all the opinions of the kitchen cabinets, of presenting to individuals what's in it for them.
right.
And one of the things that I noticed you told me in the pre-call was this notion of a forest preserve is probably pretty far from someone's experience or what they care about,
Right,
unless you explain why they should care.
right. Break it
And
down.
yeah, and I mean, in the end, this benefits our children, because 20 years
Right,
from now, the children own our community's children own these green spaces that are protected
right,
for everywhere. But what we've talked about already is that when you have green space, it improves everybody's property values, and it improves our community when everybody's property values are higher.
right.
So, I never really thought of it, but developers actually like I kind of thought in my head you would be butting heads with developers constantly, but it turns
Hmm.
out, because these communities thrive, the developers want the green space. That actually makes their projects worth more. Do you want to add anything to that concept? Have I
Absolutely.
got?
Well, we thought at the beginning that might be a problem as well, but we presented it to the developers in a way, this was about relationships where when we talked to people in the builders and we got them involved and we explained to them why it would help, why they could ask more money for their homes. We had all the numbers on why people want open space and they just want more room to do things in their yards. And some of them don't want big yards, but they want something to look at. They want a better a landscape to look out of when they have their picture, when they're sitting by their picture window. There's just all kinds of reasons, but mostly, when we got started, this was when there were a lot of newspaper ads, and you would see in the ads that they would have their homes, and then they'd say what percentage of open space they had connected to it, or how many trails they had in their development, and walking trails and ponds. And so all of a sudden, they were helping, everybody wanted to buy places with open space. And it really became a word. We coined that, I think. And just as we coined the ultimate tax cap, but people, yes, and people also need to know what's going on in their forest preserves. And there's so many good things now, where children's education and exercise, and grandma and grandpa is going to the forest preserves, and of course we also have the COVID situation. I don't know if you were going to
Oh,
ask me about that.
of course. Like there in these towns that had already embraced the green space initiatives that Kaaren was a part of creating. My gosh, there when we couldn't be together with others indoors, those communities had amazing outdoor spaces to be
They
with
did,
others.
and they used the forest preserve. Our two forest preserves, and I think every forest preserve went up double of attendance. And in DuPage, it was 3 million to 6 million. So that created that usage of the forest preserves. That's what that pandemic did, and we were outside in our yards, in our houses and our backyards, sitting 6 feet apart, and bringing our food out. But lots of movement towards our forest preserves.
So we have to remember what the alternative is. If we don't have people like Kaaren Oldfield, and maybe you, after you've spoken to Kaaren Oldfield, um, working in your own community to create more green space, what you get is overcrowding. What you get is a business on every corner. You get the kind of blight and a crime that we hear about in places with no green space. I mean,
Right.
green space tends to be the antidote to hostile ways of living. I don't know how to say it, but another thing you impressed upon me, which I'd love you to comment on, I never thought of this. So when we allow our communities to just have development, 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 just so much pressure, and we just throw up our hands and just allow it, stand by and allow it, instead of converting spaces that are for sale into green space, what we get is a higher and higher density of people, which relates to this taxes thing that you keep saying. You keep saying, that you're trying to reduce people's taxes or hold them where they are. Well, I never thought about it, but right, when we just keep adding more people to our population, no matter your town, you got to have more law enforcement, more fire safety. You got to make it even bigger school. I mean, the maintenance of roads and streets adds up. The public service gets so expensive. But so we got a choice. If we got 3 acres that could be a Bucky's, or 3 acres that could be a wonderful community resource, like a beautiful
Arts and
limestone public
culture
space.
place.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pubs. Yeah, this is a no-brainer, and the public will own it after 20 years. Why in the
right,
world would we want to add to urban blight
right.
instead of adding to our own community enjoyment?
Well, and your taxes will go up by putting more development in. You have to pay for the school taxes then, because people move out. It's urban sprawl, And it's not as bad as it used to be, but it's more traffic, it's more people moving to one place and sprawling. But as soon as you get past the sprawl, there's houses out there, but the people aren't paying for the schools yet. They may have one school there and a junior high and a high school, but as everybody else moves out, they're building a second school and a third school and a fourth
Yeah.
school. And then they're paying the same amount as if they were in the city.
Yes. Yes.
They're just living farther away and commuting. So
Yes. Yeah.
it all kind of works together, and it just is. I don't think there are any downsides. I mean, that was the other thing we had to fight, was having people increase their taxes, and we had to explain that. And at that time, when we first started, there were a lot of Republicans out in DuPage County, and they're famous for not wanting to raise their taxes. But we got the head of the Senate and several very impressive people to say that they endorsed it, and that
Yeah,
that
because
helped us a lot.
you
Because
found a way
we
to,
explained it to them, yeah,
yeah.
and they bought it, and so
Yeah.
that was getting the word out was very
Yeah.
important. Just
Yeah.
communicating and letting them know why it would be good for them, and not taking it for granted. And the referendum system, I think, is the most pure form of voting, because you're just voting yes or no. The question is on the ballot. You can say yes or you can say no, and that's it. And it really does give a good feeling of what people want.
Well, okay. So at the heart of getting people to say yes is, of course, being able to explain this all right, being able to show people the math, because you've shown me the math. We don't have time for that today, but I'm telling you, the math works out so sensibly and so reasonably that I don't think politics factors into this at all. There's
Not really.
it's just sensible when you look over the course of 20 years where you'll be if you just keep gunning along with development versus
Right.
where you'll be as a whole community if you invest in green spaces. The everybody raises up when you invest in green spaces.
Right. And the community is healthier,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
really.
yeah. It's just a lovely thing. And then I guess we have to say that there is probably some additive investors in the community that are inspired by what they see around them in these green communities. For instance, you like to talk about the McCormick family. Anybody who's been to Chicago knows about McCormick Place, and the McCormicks were this big family. But you can, in your community, inspire people with wealth and means to donate all kinds of other public trust
Yes,
capabilities. Once you get your town going in this direction, you
that's
get
right.
everybody on board, and people of great means will just keep adding to the momentum, right?
Right. The McCormick family, Brooks McCormick, who died in 2006, was the heir of the International Harvester fortune. They invented the reaper, and he lived in Wheaton, and he had a beautiful home there. He used to fly every day to Meigs Field because his offices were downtown. And back to the Chicago Mayor Daley, the Chicago environment, his wife Maggie didn't like Meigs Field there, so they the mayor ended up having somebody dig up the whole field while people were sleeping one night. So it wouldn't be an airport anyway anymore. It would be a park. But anyway, McCormick was a wonderful contributor, and he had 641 acres of land in his possession. He had a beautiful home there, and he started selling some of the land off. We've worked with him and several people in the organization to buy his farm, which was called St. James Farm. He was an equestrian, and he sold that to us. And just within the last 4 or 5 weeks, the last parcel of land that connects the McCormick land with the Morton Arboretum was sold. They had one son who was holding out, and they've been talking to them for years. And he finally decided to sell it. And so that's a whole greenway, extending for miles, really. So we've had some very successful trans transfers of land, and they don't all happen at once. We do land along the Fox River, and sometimes these things take 50 years, because some of the family doesn't want to sell them. But that is the time when we'll put a conservation easement, so nobody else can change the land. It just stays the slate rock on the riverbanks, and we finally ended up protected forever and ever, and that's
Wow.
wonderful for the people.
Okay,
So
so the conservation easement whole aspect of this is really important, and it's the reason why I want people, and so many aspects of this are really, really important, that I want people to have your direct contact, if they may, because I just can't cover this as big as it is. I mean, Kaaren and I have already spent 2 hours on our pre-call because I was just so wowed and
thank you.
interested in how we help Kaaren transfer this knowledge. You got a unique knowledge and skill set and experience set that almost every urban community in the United States, if not beyond, could use. And I think it is incredibly transportable. So the way I understand it is right now people can contact you at oldfieldkaren@gmail.com. That's Oldfield like it sounds, OLDFIELD, Kaaren with two A's, KAAREN @gmail.com. And we, of course, the innovators that we talk to on the Goodness Exchange don't often give their personal Gmail account. So we absolutely thank you for your generosity. And I'm hoping people will be curious, and even if you yourself don't see a path here that you want to investigate, you be sure, if you're listening to this podcast and you think about the people in your community who might want to talk to Kaaren, I'm pretty convinced with the time that I put into this back study on my interview with Kaaren that she has an idea that can change the future in communities all over the United States. So Kaaren, as we wrap up here, I always like to ask people, if this interview had been only 2 or 3 minutes long, we just had to cut right to the chase. What do you really wish people knew?
I wish that people knew that if they all came together, that each one of them could make this happen. We can't do this with just me. I mean, I'm one person with my unique background, but I need everybody to help. And this is a great way we all have that longing, I think, to do something for our world. And every person is important to me, and every person would have a part in this. I really think this can be extended all over the world, because there's so many of you who come from different countries and could go back to your communities and say, this is what we're doing. And I have a plan. It's not that hard. You just have to understand it. You take a government organization and you divide things into territories. We didn't have forest preserves for a long time, and there's other states that don't have them. But you start with that, you put the referendum on the ballot, and it really isn't that hard to have a plan to do this. So I need more people, and I need people who are interested. And if we do this, everybody, before it's over with, will have clean water, clean air, and what they need to live. And there's so many who don't. So that's my wish that I hope will come true. And I hope you will think about joining me in that.
Yeah, that is so lovely. Kaaren is just giving us an open invitation to start poking around at the edges of how this might work in our own communities. I encourage you to contact her or give her contact information to somebody you know in your community. She's got a system down. I'm telling you, they're batting 100%. The referendums that they put on the ballot in front of voters have raised over $2 billion and preserved 40,000 acres in a highly urban area like Chicago. It's a winning recipe. Thank you, Kaaren Oldfield.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. I appreciate everything that you do to help people be happier and turn over our trends. And I hope we are going into that wonderful revolution that you talk about. Thanks so
Ah,
much
that's
for
so
having
great.
me.
Yes, well, you are certainly a co-founder member of the conspiracy of goodness in our times. That's for sure. You've been at it a while, and we can't thank you enough. Millions of people have had their lives changed by the work of one everyday person like Kaaren Oldfield, and I think that probably is an opportunity that all of us have if we start putting one foot forward. I want to wrap up this podcast with the reminder that I will put a whole lot of links over at the Goodness Exchange on the article written about this podcast. There'll be a full article written about this podcast episode. There you can find all the links to anything Kaaren and I mentioned. She and I will probably exchange even more links. Also, I think we stumbled upon kind of framing out this innovator's recipe a little bit in our conversation today. So I'll put that over there too. You probably won't find all those details on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast. Go to the Goodness Exchange. It's goodnessexchange.com and check out the Conspiracy of Goodness podcast. And all the people like Kaaren that I've been interviewing for 4 years now are there, and they will put a spring in your step, and they may connect you to what you're uniquely built to contribute. So thank you very much. Have a great day.